topics to talk about during this meeting. These are either suggested by our graduate assistants or by Hannah or even by us ourselves. So we talk about things happening in our classes, current events, and a lot about campus community comes up as well. So it really is a program that's focused on gaining that student perspective and makes it clear to student partners that that's a perspective that's acknowledged and also valued. And then another aspect of our program is each student partner has an individual project that they're doing. I like to call it a passion project because you can basically recommend any kind of topic that you would like to explore throughout the semester and what that comes to look like and what format or what media you choose to express that project in is unique to you. You're going to get to see a lot of the projects that our student partners are going to be presenting during this session, and they're absolutely amazing. And I definitely encourage everyone to check out on the CTRL website those projects more in depth. I think we can go on to the next slide. So, a little bit about what this program has come to mean to each partner and to AU community as a whole. As a student partner, we are able to gain somewhat of like professional skills and leadership experience. I am someone who greatly benefited from this program because it was a job that I could put on a resume, but it also introduced me to be able to advocate for myself as a student. I was able to communicate with professors in a professional manner and make them see me as an equal. I also was able to explore this passion that I had for education, which many of our student partners, that's what draws them to this program. And it is from that experience you learn that, oh, your student experience and what you go through at this school is actually something that is important and teachers and students alike should hear. And then for instructors, staff, and administration, this is an opportunity for you all to critically reflect upon how you approach diverse perspectives and how you listen to your students. We have some great, I don't want to say resources, but firsthand accounts here of what learning at AU can look like. And then through this, we also hope that you gain some new uh, tactics to reconceptualize learning and teaching and make it a more collaborative process. That's something that we emphasize, the piece of partnership. And then also create a more effective, equitable, and meaningful courses and integrate student experiences into those learning processes. So the next slide. This was kind of the 4 C's, which I developed to kind of describe some of the values that we really gear the program towards. So the first C being community, and this is a supportive network for students to be able to voice their opinions and learn about what advocacy not only means to them, but their faculty members. And it's a program where we're really all constantly uplifted by CTRL staff. And then we have cognizance, which really is reinforced by the fact that CTRL avoids commodifying the student perspective, but we more so create this as a space where we validate each other's experiences and we work to raise that awareness. And then collaboration, we approach how to protect that kind of relationship of student perspective and educator advocacy. And this is a great experience because this panel itself is us collaborating on amplifying student voices. And then commitment, you all showed up today and we believe in the collective accountability of faculty, staff, and students. And I'm really excited to see what we do during this panel. I think we can pass it on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reba, for that introduction. And I just like to highlight too that these values guide the program, but we also hope to model them and spread them across campus. And later on in the session, we'll talk about how do these values show up in your classroom and how might you transform your classroom to align with some of the mindsets and things that we do here. So for the next 40 minutes, we'll be presenting one at a time the 4 student partner projects that were done this semester. And the way this will work, each student will speak a little bit about their project, and then we'll open it up to a few questions from the audience after each project rather than waiting to the end. So we're starting with Gabriela.
No. Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm Gabriela Rupp. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a junior at AU. I'm a double major in secondary education and women's gender and sexuality studies. And I also have a minor in political science, a certificate in women policy and political leadership. And I also recently entered the grad program, the combined grad program for education policy and leadership. This is my second semester with CTRL. It's been a wonderful experience. Last semester, I did a project on demarginalizing feminine speech patterns in the classroom, which I was really passionate about. So not talking about that today, but if you're interested, check it out on the website. Yeah, so this semester, my project is rethinking interdisciplinary study at AU. And I was drawn to this because, as I mentioned with my programs earlier, I am enrolled in 3 different schools at AU, in SPA, in the School of Education, and in CAS. So I've kind of interacted with each school and how their content and their methods and their community dynamics differ. And I'm just really invested in how we can improve student experiences through cross-curricular learning to kind of bridge those divides and live up to our liberal arts potential. So my methods for this project, when we started the semester, I was, telling Hannah at the very beginning, I wasn't sure what my topic would be, but I really wanted it to be grounded in student experiences. So a lot more in-person conversations and a little less on the research side, like last semester. So I sat down with students from diverse backgrounds and various majors to discuss their experiences in courses outside of their major. 3 different students. One was computer science, one was SIS, and one was an elementary education student who are all featured in the project. And the project you can see on the website basically centers direct quotes from them, but I'm just going to pull the highlights for you. And they shared stories about classes they've taken, challenges they've overcome, suggestions for instructors to engage students, and concerns about the university's culture as a whole. A lot of them emphasized experiences in their habits of mind courses because those are the most common interaction with the interdisciplinary things at AU, but of course, the ideas are widely applicable. So a lot of the reason that students were acknowledging for struggling with the interdisciplinary study at AU is they feel a gap between how AU advertises itself and promotes its values as an interdisciplinary liberal arts school and their student experiences once they come here. So I'm just kind of looking at how we can bring those two together. So some of the challenges that students noted facing when wanting to meaningfully engaged with interdisciplinary study is rigid program requirements, time constraints, pressure to remain in what they see as high-paying or marketable fields of study, and a lack of institutional support. And the outcomes for the project are to understand the ways that AU encouraged interdisciplinary study and academic exploration and where improvements can be made, and to reflect on how instructors can best leverage their positions to support positive.
Tilt the camera, tilt the mic, angle it, it'll work.
To support positive outcomes for students. Yeah, we can switch. Okay, so I kind of grouped them into 5 main themes that the students brought up. And these are our 5. And then I'll just go through like some ideas that they gave of ways that we can kind of meet those goals. So the first one is to create a supportive classroom culture. And students remarked that some ways to do this are to reduce separation between instructors and students, to minimize one-way classroom communication, to create space for questioning without feeling like they're interrupting something or burdening their instructor, and to acknowledge the impacts of imposter syndrome. That one's especially big when students are outside of their major. They may not feel as comfortable as in their home major. So kind of acknowledging that at the start and then finding ways to work against that in your norms in class. And to bridge cultural differences across schools by establishing shared norms and to acknowledge diverse student motivations. This last one was really important to a lot of the students. Specifically, a lot of them were talking about the habits of mind courses and how they've had instructors who've said something along the lines of, I know you're maybe not all here because this is your favorite topic. Maybe you're just here for the core requirement, but I'm excited to engage with you and I hope you'll do the same. Kind of acknowledging those diverse motivations. And then the second theme was do not assume prior knowledge. This one was also one of the biggest ones. So some ideas were to set clear expectations on your syllabus, provide optional supplemental reading material for students who want to engage further, implement an asset-based learning model. So acknowledging that all the students are different in your class, especially if it's a core class, especially if it's not their home area of study, but that's actually a good thing. And how can you leverage that so that the students can learn from one another on the areas that you have expertise in, whilst remaining centered in your learning goals. Making connections to student interests, and then don't just teach the content, but also the style and the structure of writing and reading in that topic. So this one came up a lot with the habits of mind. Basically, the idea is that it shouldn't just be an intro course. You should be learning how to think and how to write and how to read in that field so that they can then implement that back in their home area. And preparing students for the reading. This was one of the biggest things as well. One of the biggest struggles they mentioned was, I didn't know what I was looking for in the reading. I knew that I was supposed to be doing it, but I wasn't sure why we were reading it. I wasn't sure what the outcome was supposed to be. So giving that kind of prep work is really important. And then the third theme is incorporating diverse and creative modes of engagement. Students gave examples of classes that had engaged them beyond the classroom in the DC area, and incorporating relevant creative technology resources to get kids engaged. And the fourth theme, using holistic assessment and safe failure in your classroom. So some ideas were to ensure assessments and grading practices reflect your educational values, to give frequent opportunities for feedback and revision, and to prioritize quality over quantity when assigning, as well as considering effort and engagement not just being how many times did you speak in class, but acknowledging diverse ways that students are engaging with the curriculum and incorporating those things into your grading. One quote that I really liked from one of the students was, encourage students to be engaged in improving, not perfect. I really liked that one. I think it sums it up well. And then the last theme was to foster student motivation. And they were just giving us some creative ideas about how professors have done this. They talked about various documentaries, guest speakers, campus events, or community engagement in DC or also in their home states to kind of connect students to what they already know and what they feel connected to, and to empower students by incorporating choice into your assignments, and the idea that this doesn't have to come at the expense of your learning outcomes. And then the final thing that was talked about with the students, most of my questions for them were centered around what instructors can do, but as things tend to go with AU students, they had a lot to say about AU as an institution, and I think that's really valuable as well. And most of the ones here are may seem a little critical to you, but it's just important to acknowledge there's of course things that we do well as well. So their notes on AU culture were that AU sometimes struggles to reconcile its interest as a research institution and a liberal arts teaching model. Students reported that they felt the effects of recent budget shortfall and the tightening of the budgets that have required some unfortunate sacrifices. Students said they were feeling the effects of that through bigger class sizes being proposed, threats to smaller program, overburdening of student-facing staff, as well as some programs facing cuts to program director stipends and course releases. And they also mentioned that this is kind of a larger theme point, but the institutional and the societal preference for larger or more marketable schools pressures them to stay pretty narrow in their fields. And then this is not an AU problem, but just a higher ed phenomenon that's been around forever. A lot of students remarked on feeling GPA pressure, and that kind of making them a little less willing to step out of their comfort zone with interdisciplinary study and go to a topic that's new to them because they felt like maybe they were risking their GPA to do so. So we can kind of look to some of those grading solutions and the more like holistic approach that was suggested to solve some of that. But yeah, I think that's all I have.
Yeah, so we'll now move to a brief Q&A for Gabriela. So maybe 1 to 2 questions from the audience before we move on to the next project. Yeah, Roshan, we'll bring you the mic.
Hi, Gabriela. Thank you. That was great and very informative. I was really interested on the question of like the way students feel that they have to focus on marketability and like, how that changes like the way they choose majors. Did you notice any kind of student feedback about, like being forced to think about marketability versus what they actually wanted to study? Or do you think there are ways in which AU could better help students understand, what the purpose of an undergraduate major is? Yeah, so any thoughts on that? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, that was a big topic of conversation. Again, like the students were across broad areas, so most of those comments came from the student who I spoke to who's an education student, versus like the comp sci major and the SIS major would have been on the flip side of that conversation. And yeah, basically she was remarking that she felt a pressure both internally at AU and externally from family and just societal pressures in general to conform to high-paying fields, things that will lead to a guaranteed job or are perceived as leading to a guaranteed job. And so I think that AU certainly does better than other institutions at kind of interrupting that, but we definitely have a lot of room to grow. Students definitely see the difference in how their schools are treated, in terms of size, in terms of funding, in terms of how their faculty are treated, all those things. And so just knowing that like that is perceptible to students, and looking at ways that instructors and administrative staff can interrupt that and reinforce the liberal arts model of interdisciplinary and learning to learn and not learning to make money.
One more question and then.
Thanks for that presentation. Really helpful. It's my first year adjuncting, so appreciate that. Did you get any insight on what types of assignments students found to be the most impactful in terms of learning from each other, and just leaving giving them the greatest sense of what the course outcome, the learning outcomes are supposed to be, giving them the greatest takeaways from the entire class?
Yeah, so each of the students separately remarked that they preferred classes where they felt they got to engage with their peers a lot, so a very like conversation-based model. In terms of the assignments, they had differing opinions on like things like group work and stuff. Most of them remarked that they didn't love typical quiz, exam, rote memorization. That's kind of an obvious one to us, I think. But with group work, some of them were saying, yes, we love it. We get to learn from one another. It's a great opportunity to engage with people from other fields. And others were saying, not so much. I didn't really feel supported in the group work. So kind of like when you are doing those like collaborative approach things, I think a lot of the things that the students wanted to emphasize was how we can scaffold that and support them in that so that they don't feel like it's just between them and the student they haven't met who maybe is more or less motivated than them. And how can we kind of like provide support from the moment it's assigned to the moment it's due.
All right, thank you so much, Gabriela. We can clap after each presenter because this is phenomenal work and they put a lot of time and energy into that. All right, so Katelyn will share next.
Hi, hello. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Katelyn Lewicky. That's spelled Katelyn I use she, her pronouns. I am sitting here today along my colleagues. You can see me. I have short blonde hair. I am wearing a brown cardigan and a black top that you can see as well. I would like to start off by saying the reason that I share all of this with you is that my project is based in accessibility. I also want to double check. Can you guys hear me okay with this? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So as I said, my project was based in accessibility, and pardon me, I'm going to go back for a second. My majors, what I actually study here at American, is business administration and marketing. I am doing my undergrad degree. I'm graduating a year early. I am also dual enrolled in my grad program, which is the Master's of Science in Marketing. I love everything I study. I feel very privileged to be here. And I'm very lucky to also be able to step outside of that. So as I said, I primarily live in the business school. The majority of my coursework is there, but I've been very lucky to take some disability justice coursework at AU, and also some more humanities side of things, and touch into that liberal arts education that I find very valuable. So again, I'm graduating a year early. For me, that meant that I had to step away from a lot of my disability coursework that I valued very strongly. And as we've kind of talked about with Gabriela, focusing my coursework on something that I believe will make me money, frankly. So for me, coming into CTRL is a wonderful opportunity to actually give this student input, feel like I'm making a difference, feel like I can be part of this community at AU beyond what I'm learning, if that makes sense. So my resource this semester, as you can see, there's a QR code up here. You can access it. On the resource itself, there's also an access copy. I believe in the upper right-hand corner, there's another QR code. In there, you can see everything that's in that resource, but written out in a way that's accessible to screen readers if you utilize that software. So my resource, as you can see, is faculty focused. I wanted it to be something that helps the professors that I have and beyond, who I have, of course, but it's all based in student input, as most of our projects are. I focus on this anti-ableist teaching guidelines, which I'll talk more about in a moment, which boost radical inclusion versus this accommodations model. And I wanted to just talk in the resource and with you all about the larger impact of this ableist rhetoric that we have in the world all around us. But of course, at an institution of privilege as AU, it comes up. You can skip ahead for me, thank you. So as you can see in my resource, I self-define anti-ableism as going beyond the complacency and neutrality of being not ableist, and to describe the work of those who actually work against ableism in everyday life. I'm hoping that many of us recognize this comes off of Ibram Kendi's definition of anti-racism, going beyond, being not racist and actually working against things proactively in our everyday life. If you have not read any of his work, I highly recommend it. There's also a full additional reading list at the end of my resource. I highly, highly, highly recommend. Of course, I'm not the expert on all these things, and I think it's really important that we all are exposed. So also with that, I wanted to talk about something that we talk a lot about in CTRL, which is the concept of UDL, or the Universal Design of Learning. This is a teaching approach that works to accommodate the needs and abilities of all learners and aims, in the ideal world, to eliminate unnecessary hurdles in the learning process. So as we can see, a lot of these bullet points come pretty straight from my resource itself. These were the takeaways that I found from student voices that are most needed in our community to actually support our students. Okay, so of course, flexibility. I'm sure have all gotten student feedback that a certain policy is inaccessible to them, in that I got sick and I can't get a doctor's note and I need to be able to miss class without penalty. Things like that under the accommodated model need that accommodation, right? So we need to say, oh, okay, that's fine. Here's this extra thing that I can do for you. And what I'm encouraging us all to examine is the idea that we start at this base level where we're just understanding each other, right? And maybe we don't need that accommodation. Maybe that's something that's built into how our courses are designed, right? And understanding that, again, at an institution of privilege, such as the one that we get to attend, a lot of our students are here on financial aid. A lot of them work, a lot of them commute, all of these things. And being able to support students in a way that doesn't call them out for that is huge. And that touches beyond accessibility, of course. So flexibility is a huge thing. Accessible course materials, I mean this both in the literal sense. I will say flat out, every single thing that you give to students should be screen reader accessible. That is a baseline of accessibility. You can Google very easily how to check. There's free resources everywhere on the internet. I promise it's not hard. But beyond that, minimizing cost barriers. I understand that there's an ethical dilemma with offering free resources that are meant to not be free. I encourage you to examine the cost barriers of your courses and remember that students sacrifice a lot and students' families sacrifice a lot for them to be here. Minimizing those extra barriers is huge. And I will say it has personally made me add and drop courses. And as a professor, we don't, we don't need people to drop our courses because they can't access a $400 textbook that needs to be in print for some reason. Okay, Radical access, kind of following this UDL model that I've been talking about, it's students know that they have to advocate for their needs, and we are used to that, I promise, it's all we do. But to the best of our ability, making it so that professors, staff, faculty, are starting at a level which is accessible, right? So again, making sure everything is screen reading compatible. If you get feedback from a previous semester that, I'm sorry, I don't have a good example with me, but just keeping that with you and making sure that we are starting at a place where students can actually reach you. Diversifying our assessment modalities. I'm sure that a lot of us have heard about this from student feedback over the years. Of course, the statistics have shown for decades, test taking is not always the most equitable way to, evaluate student performance. And it definitely does not capture all kinds of learning, right? So really critically thinking about that and making sure that we are including, different ways to assess students, and also something that's worked really well for my peers and me, different group work modalities. I've had professors who have said, today you get the option, they say, everybody close your eyes, raise your hand if you want to work in partners, or if you want to work in small groups, or if you want to work alone. And things like that really meet students where they're at, especially on a class-by-class basis. As we know, terrible things are happening in the world, and students come into your classroom with different needs every day. So things that, again, keep that student in mind are huge. And my last note here is student voices, of course, matter. Addressing the impact of ableism from peers, administration, instructors. I know that, of course, we can only control what's in our own classroom, but you'll see in my resource, there is a lot that, unfortunately, students perpetuate among each other. There's a lot, again, with the kind of institution that we attend that kind of comes top down from administration and the structure of the university. So listening to that, right? And even if you can't improve a student's experience with, I don't know, a peer, saying, I hear you and I understand, and asking the question of how can I support you in this classroom means more than you will ever know. These are my biggest takeaways, but I would really love to hear questions about how we can make our classrooms more accessible. I also want to shout out, there is a disability, it's called the Disability Plus Staff and Faculty Union. Highly recommend reaching out, looking out into them. They have amazing resources. We have a student disabled union as well. But even if you do not identify as disabled, finding these resources and learning from people who do is huge, and I would say is the best service that you can do to your students in this case. But yeah, I'd love to hear more questions about what I can answer. Yes, or sorry, one second.
Also, before asking the question, please introduce yourself so that those online know, well, those online and in person know who you are.
Hey, thank you for that presentation, Katelyn.
Yeah.
I'm Robert Klemko. I teach a sports journalism class in SOC. If you could go back to that one slide, it mentioned, be cognizant of including group work, which requires varying interaction levels. I've had students who struggle with the interaction in the groups. In the same vein, I've had students who are uncomfortable interviewing strangers, which is often required in journalism classes. I'm not aware of any jobs in journalism which don't require a high degree of interaction, whether that's on the front end when you're interviewing people or in the newsroom on the back end in the editing process. It's been my feeling that requiring a certain amount of interaction does a service to students by creating a realistic expectation about the field that they're trying to enter. So how do I balance that? Because this is my first time even thinking about that, because I want to show students what they're going to have to do, and I want them to have the opportunity to go do something else if they're uncomfortable with that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because as you say, in journalism and many other fields, interaction is never completely avoidable, right? We all know that as professionals. But I would say making sure that you're keeping tabs on your class and saying, or not saying, but noticing like, hey, this student seems uncomfortable to a degree that's beyond, oh, I'm not used to doing group work, this is scary. If it's beyond that and we're noticing patterns of anxiety and just general uncomfortability, which are, I don't want to say hard to overcome, because of course that's what learning is, right? It's being uncomfortable and learning how to deal with that. But noticing that, and then I would say my second big note on that is grading and making sure that you're evaluating students, not in a way that says, I expect you to come in and be able to go interview Joe Flacco, right? Like coming in and saying, okay, these students seem to struggle with it in this way, and we're not grading them and saying that because they came in that way, we're done, right? I think maybe if you notice one semester they're particularly struggling with it, you notice that they're not where you want them to be, maybe that becomes a whole day, a whole lesson is, hey, I know that we're super uncomfortable, but this is kind of what we have to do, and making it fun and emphasizing, communicating with students that just because they are uncomfortable or and sometimes unable to do that kind of communication, that it's going to mean that they fail a class. Because as we've talked about, grades shouldn't be everything, but they are, frankly. Like as a student, that is what we prioritize. So I'm sorry, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to Zoe's project now. Oh, yes, clap for Katelyn first. Thank you. Thank you, Katelyn. I'm going to move Zoe back to on screen. Zoe, are you ready?
Hello?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, I'm Zoe Wofford, ACM pronouns. And I'm actually very new to the CTRL. This is my first semester here. So I'm glad to be doing the work that I am. So starting from the premise that professors are expected to be moderators as well as teachers, I hope to speak with, or I did speak with AU professors about their experiences with classroom discussion. I hope to continue this work in the future. I think that particularly within the humanities fields, as well as fields that engage more in cultural theory and just these kinds of areas where there's not as many easy answers, or areas that are more dedicated to discussion-based labor. One thing that often goes unacknowledged is that professors are expected to not only teach the material, but also consistently and effectively moderate a classroom, which is not an easy job. So going into this, I wanted to first and foremost kind of acknowledge that that is a form of labor, and that professors should support each other in that labor and should be supported in that labor. So this was made primarily with humanities professors in mind. I'm in the humanities. I spoke primarily with humanities professors because that's who I could get a hold of. Um, with an emphasis on particularly more emotional or contentious topics, such as like politics in the classroom. So, through these conversations, I learned a lot. Sorry, my brain's blanking at the moment. Through these conversations, I learned a lot from professors and from other students about kind of what makes an effective discussion, what doesn't, and how to do discussion effectively. And some of these kind of seem like common sense, but they're also what I heard the most. So I think part of it is just common sense, but I wanted to include them anyways. So first and foremost, one thing I heard from multiple professors was to speak directly with students about what they believe does and doesn't work, and that the point at which most discussions break down is when something isn't working and the professor isn't cognizant of it, or they kind of lack that awareness, because like situational awareness and the ability to kind of read a room is very crucial in this. And that isn't a skill set that necessarily professors are asked to develop in every circumstance, nor one that anyone is perfect with. So getting students help in that regard, asking them up front, like, do you think this worked? Do you think this didn't work? Where did it work? Where did it not? Can be a huge boon to the classroom, especially because some students are often better at reading each other than professors are at reading students. Um, so sometimes we know each other better than the professors know us, and sometimes we're able to find things in discussions that might have seemed off to us or might have rubbed us the wrong way that professors just didn't pick up on because of the power gap, because of the generational gap, because of just those kinds of differences. Another key thing is having an idea kind of going in of when you want to intervene in a discussion and when you want to let students handle themselves. Stability is kind of key here. Um, having having set limits, whether those limits are ones that you have internalized or whether that's in like a written agreement. One professor I spoke with mentioned keeping a written agreement of like classroom expectations and discussion expectations, which I quite liked. Um, in order to just know at what point you are going to step in and how much you want to step in, at what point you think it's necessary, and different professors are going to have different perspectives on what students should be able to handle, what students should have to handle. But again, consistency is key here more than anything else. And I'd say the major takeaway I got was that discomfort can be constructive, and that over time you should try to get a feeling for when it is constructive and when it is not, because discomfort can range from a wide variety of things. It can mean discomfort in the sense of like a discrimination is occurring, in which case you should step in. Whereas, but also when, especially in the humanities, you're engaging in a lot of critical ideas and a lot of things that haven't quite been introduced into your worldview. And part of the learning process has to be discomfort in that case, because if you enter and leave a humanities classroom with the exact same worldview as you had before, then that kind of says something about your ability to engage with the material and your ability to engage with the learning. So introducing the idea that discomfort can be a source of knowledge and discomfort can be a source of learning is quite important. And teaching students and encouraging students to engage with their feelings without necessarily believing that it is against the material. I feel like I need and what I mean by that is that helping students understand that they can be uncomfortable in a classroom without meaning that something necessarily needs to change. But again, there's a difference between, say, the discomfort of someone who is actively being marginalized in a classroom versus someone who is being confronted with ideas they aren't familiar with. And that's what I mean by like get a feeling for when it is and when it isn't. And that comes down to like understanding how to spot discrimination in the classroom, which is an entirely different discussion that many of my colleagues have, I believe, handled quite well.
Right, great. Thank you, Zoe. So we will open up the floor to questions. And also those who are online, feel free to put questions in the chat if you have questions. Anybody have a question for Zoe? And if not, I have one up here. Zoe, I'm interested in, can you say a little bit more about when discomfort is not constructive, or if there are specific examples from your resource that you think are important to point to?
Yeah, so I mean the main example that I gave throughout the main example I gave and the main example that I see is cases of discrimination, like, because then there's that difference between sort of an ideological discomfort versus a discomfort that takes place within like an intrinsic identity, where if it's based in sort of your worldview or your ideology, those are places in which if you're in a humanities environment, those kind of things kind of should be confronted, and the goal is to confront them to challenge pre-existing notions. Whereas there are identities such as if a student is a person of color, if a student is transgender or queer, those aren't places that they need to be confronted in, if that makes sense. I hope I've been able to meaningfully distinguish that.
Yes, absolutely. And that similar question came up in the chat, so I'm glad you were able
Yeah,
to
let
address.
me check the chat.
No, I think yeah, unless you want to add more.
Faculty you can get more information on discomfort.
For the people in the room, the question is how faculty can get more information about discomfort.
I don't have any resources off the top of my head, unfortunately. However, just in general, a lot of my research was based in kind of understandings of actually quite like Katelyn's research in like anti-racism and how to conduct kind of anti-racist pedagogy, which I know that there are plenty of resources about. I just don't have any right off the top of my head, but that's been primarily what I've been pulling from theory-wise.
So this is Sarah Gilchrist. I'm a librarian here. I'm sitting with a bunch of librarians, but I wanted to share some resources that I've used personally as an instructor and also that we've created here. So the library has LibGuides, and we have an anti-racist praxis guide that is a great piece to go to if you're interested in learning more about anti-racist praxis. But one of the things that I found helpful is intergroup dialogue. And the tenets of intergroup dialogue are specifically about creating an environment that is about dialogue versus debate. If you Google debate versus dialogue, there's a really easy comparison list that comes up that talks about like what is dialogue, what promotes constructive discussion, and what is debate, which is really just, making sure that you prove your point and that you win. And so I think that that's a really good starting point. That's easy to find online. But I know that we have an intergroup dialogue group here, and so there might be other resources on campus. That training is really great because it encourages faculty to practice with each other, how to facilitate a conversation across difference, how to set up guidelines in the classroom ahead of time so that like we did for this presentation, what our expectations are, not just telling students, these are our expectations, but asking students, what are your expectations for this classroom? How can we as a group set guidelines for constructive conversations? If you want to talk to me more about this, you can find me at gilchrist@american.edu.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Zoe, for his project, and we have one more. Pass it over to Naz.
Good afternoon or good morning still. My name is Nasaiah Algarin. I go by Naz. I am a sophomore studying elementary and special education, class of 2027. So I'm the student partner team's baby still, and I still have a couple of more years of undergrad. While I go over everything, for time's sake, if you guys could scan the QR code and just skim around the site while I speak, that would be great. So today I'll be sharing a project I've been working on called AU Unfiltered. We see statistics, we hear rumors, but Who and what is AU student demographic? Do we know their story just by looking at their face? Rhetorical questions. I come from a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and trilingual background. I also work with the AU Experience team as a peer facilitator. I took the Understanding Media course where I did a human interest story, and I've also taken a Power, Privilege, and Equality social ethical course, which are all some of the inspirations that I've had when forming this project. So very interdisciplinary. So this initiative uses personal stories and photography to challenge stereotypes and foster inclusivity within the AU community. So this project began as a preliminary phase to uplift student voices, which still remains our mission, but it has since evolved into a faculty-facing resource to share authentic experiences about identity, culture, and community from students. We're also preparing to launch a student-facing component later in the semester through the Civic Dialogue grant, which is very exciting. And so yeah, AU Unfiltered is about storytelling, but not just about storytelling, but creating spaces where voices can be heard and where understanding and compassion can grow. Inside, please. Thank you. So here's a glimpse of the project website, which showcases story profiles from students. The About page section explains more of the mission, vision, goals, and about me. We also have the project application and insights for faculty section, which offers practical approaches that faculty can integrate these stories into their teaching and learning practices. Each story is carefully curated to reflect the diverse perspectives within our community. Some of the people that are on our site identify as Jewish, Palestinian, Cuban, mixed race, biracial. So a very diverse group of students, which we hope to continue expanding within this following semester. So yeah, whether it's about students sharing their experiences, navigating their identity, and in the future, faculty members offering insight into inclusive pedagogy, these narratives create a strong platform for growth. So there are a few key takeaways from this project that I'd like to highlight. So first and foremost, AU Unfiltered has shown the importance of fostering connections. So by sharing personal stories, we are essentially creating a foundation for empathy and understanding, which are extremely critical when discussing race, racism, identity in the classroom, especially within these past few years. Second, diverse perspectives really do matter. So hearing student stories from individuals with different backgrounds has also challenged me and my assumptions and also broadened my perspective, which I hope it does for yours. And finally, collaboration has been key to this project's success. So working with peers, my colleagues, faculty, community members, other departments has shown me the importance of teamwork and in amplifying these voices and reaching more people, because leadership achieves greatness only when it embraces collaboration while recognizing that true strengths lie in uniting these talents and perspectives of others to create a shared vision. To apply these takeaways, I recommend integrating storytelling into your curriculum. For example, you can use narratives from AU Unfiltered as case studies to facilitate discussions about identity and culture. You could also encourage students to share their experiences as a part of assignments or projects to build a more inclusive learning environment. And lastly, you can consider collaborating with AU Unfiltered, CTRL, to collect and share stories from your own departments or classrooms, as the ultimate goal is to make a well-established database that can be utilized for future research specific to American University and be continued beyond my years attending here. And for Q&A, I do have one question to share. What do you hope happens with AU Unfiltered moving forward? So you can answer that question, or you can ask any other question.
You're posing a question.
I'm posing it, but you can use it as a baseline, or you can ask a totally different question.
I want to know. Why don't you answer this?
Okay. All right. Okay. So again, we were awarded the Civic Dialogue grant. So this will become a student-facing resource as well, with some events being planned out throughout the semester, with more research and with more photography sessions to add more to people to our website. So I'm super excited about that. I'm also looking into other resources and departments to potentially give this project to after my time at AU. But thankfully with the grant, not only do we have some interesting in-person events upcoming, but also being able to get another domain and just be able to have this resource continue for a longer period of time beyond my time at American.
Thank you for sharing this project. I want to give you my card at the end. Again, this is Sarah Gilchrist. We are hosting a human library as part of the inauguration to encourage civil dialogue. And if you're not familiar with that, it's an organization that was founded to start conversations about identity. And you can check out a human book, but I'd love to partner with you, and maybe the library could help you with this project. I can't speak for everybody in the library, but I think that might be a good partnership for us to start.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're always looking for partnerships around the university as we want this to be a more, I guess, impacting or influential project that, again, is a universal resource within our community beyond CTRL in the future.
Hi, everyone. Naz, what a great presentation. Everyone, thank you so much. You're in School of Ed, correct? Sophomore? Have you thought about how this project connects to what you want to do when you graduate from AU? Is there a link?
Yeah, so I plan to, like Gabriela, pursue education policy. So really just being able to understand different demographics and understanding different backgrounds and identities, both as an educator and just as a future policy analyst or whatever I end up doing in policy, to just be able to have a more relatable, empathetic, and emotional connection to what I'm doing aside from just statistics, because paper and statistics can only do so much. Sometimes you just need to see to believe, and yeah.
We also have a question from Samia online. Samia, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, Naz. This is Samia. I am a second year grad film and media arts student. I am very stunned with your work and the goal of your project, and us as film students. I'm sorry if you guys hear some background. I'm at the airport. We learn a lot of skills about photography, videography, and storytelling, and we'll be more than happy to help. I'm not sure how can we how can we engage with this project, and also we do have a community doc. I'm not sure if you would like to also reach out to the professor in charge and see what's the other options that you might have if we can integrate that too.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so I can, if anyone wants my information and the CTRL information, we could be happy to have you reach out to us so that we can plan for partnerships and collaborations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, let's clap for that one. We have about 10 minutes left together, and what we wanted to close out with was some more general questions for the panel, specifically about kind of your experience as a student partner, and now thinking about how could that translate into the classroom. So we have a few questions up here, but I might, for the sake of time, just pose this last one. How might instructors recreate the experience that you experienced in doing this project and this type of advocacy and agency work? How can you recreate that in the classroom and apply some of the principles that Reba shared earlier?
Okay. Yeah, so Hannah and I have been talking throughout the semester about like various campus resources that include students and how we can like recreate the CTRL model in other departments. Outside of CTRL, I'm also the student representative or a student representative for the Critical Race, Gender, and Culture Studies Faculty Council. And they do a really wonderful job. We have 2 student representatives, and they do a really wonderful job of incorporating our voices in a space that would typically be just faculty centered. That way they can kind of bounce things off of us. So I think it's something that other departments could really learn from. And then as far as in the classroom, I think a couple of you mentioned like really taking student feedback seriously when you're designing your syllabus for the following semester and not allowing those things to brush past you. And also, if you have a student who seems particularly willing to help out, actively incorporating them in that process. Now, of course, that comes at the expense of, we don't want to be making them do unpaid labor and be a TA without being paid to be a TA. But, you know, finding ways to incorporate that in a way that's also meaningful to them.
I'll say one small note on that as well. As we've all been talking about too, rethinking interdisciplinary education, and bringing in, again, core classes are a wonderful example where not everybody wants to take a biology class, but we all have to, and finding ways to make that applicable to everybody. But in a similar way, I think the reason, like I said, that I really love my time in CTRL is that it allows me to use my brain differently, and I get to use what I do here and bring it back into a business classroom. I think that that experience is beyond value. I think it's the best thing that I could have done for my education here at AU. And so bringing that motivation into your own classroom of how can I teach students things that are useful beyond my class, useful beyond education, ideally, right? Is that we want to prepare students to go into the world. So just thinking about that, thinking about my course matter and more, and what can we do to make it applicable, is something that I've always appreciated in classes. And again, it's what draws me to these extracurricular activities.
I also want to open this up to Reba, Zoe, or even Ayah, if you want to add anything here. Anybody online?
If you don't mind, I'd actually like to take the second question.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to say that one of the things that I appreciated the most about my project was the way that it got me in touch with faculty. And one of the things that I'm hoping to continue to do over the course of my time at CTRL is to kind of focus more on relationships between students and faculty, because oftentimes it's not that we're set against each other per se, but rather that students and faculty are seen as having goals that are entirely separate from one another, and having experiences that are separate from one another, when everything about my project has consistently told me that we're actually quite aligned most of the time, if not all of the time. So I want to kind of really hammer that point home, that students and faculty have a set of shared goals that they can discuss with one another and like converge with one another about, and that we're all kind of here to learn something. We're all here to do something. And the best thing we can do is to help each other in the ways that we can. And that doesn't just mean faculty helping students. It also means students listening to faculty and learning about their experiences, which is kind of a reversal of the typical expectation, but I think it's equally important.
Absolutely, Zoe. Thank you for that. With the time we have left, I do want to share with the audience. I know Ayah dropped this in the chat online, but for the in-person audience, if you're not already aware, which I don't think many people are, the student partners, they work on these projects and they work with me and my team at CTRL, but you can also work with them. So this QR code will bring you to a Qualtrics form. It's also on the bookmarks that we've been handing out. So if there's any point in this semester where you want to meet with one of them and talk more about your teaching, run your syllabus by them, run an assignment idea by them, even invite them into your class to just sit in and get a feel for what's going on and give you some ideas for what you might do, to, for example, increase student engagement. This was something that, if Reba wants to step in and add anything, but Reba came up with during her time here, was kind of developing this idea that student partners can also be consultants and partners directly with you.
I think we have 3 more minutes for a final reflection.
Yeah. Ayah, you want to introduce that? Oh, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. So for those in person, if you could share with a colleague or in the chat, what is one way you apply these student perspectives in your teaching? That will be very helpful and insightful for us. And we'll then close out.
Yeah, so I'll put up here the closing slide with the QR code to fill out a survey on the session. So as you are filling that out, also reflecting on that question, what are you taking away from today? So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks again to all of these amazing students, graduate and undergraduate students who make this program possible and who do the work. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.